The hospital corridor felt endless that night. The lights were bright, but everything else felt dull and heavy. The air smelled of medicine and disinfectant, and the sound of footsteps echoed across the long hallway. A single father stood near the reception desk, holding his phone tightly. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from fear and exhaustion. He had been awake for almost 2 days. His young child was in another wing of the hospital, getting tests done, and he was waiting for the doctor to call him. He had never liked hospitals. They reminded him of moments he wanted to forget. Years ago, his life had changed suddenly, leaving him alone with a small child and a heart full of unanswered questions. Since then, he had learned how to be strong even when he felt weak inside. That night, he felt more tired than usual. His mind was crowded with thoughts. What if the test results were bad? What if he could not afford the treatment? What if he failed again as a parent? His phone vibrated. It was a message from the nurse asking him to come to a specific room to meet the doctor. He looked at the room number and started walking quickly. The hallway had many similar doors. He checked the numbers again and again, but his eyes were blurry. He stopped in front of a door that looked right. Without thinking too much, he gently pushed it open. Inside, the room was quiet. The lights were dim. The curtains were half closed. Machines stood beside a hospital bed, making soft beeping sounds. For a second, he thought he had come too early. Then he saw her. A woman was lying on the bed, her body thin, her face pale. Her hair was tied loosely and her eyes were half open. She looked tired, but not angry or scared. She looked calm, almost peaceful. She noticed him and slowly turned her head. Their eyes met. He froze at the door, suddenly realizing his mistake. This was not the right room. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I think I came to the wrong room." His voice sounded strange, like it didn't belong to him. He felt embarrassed and ready to leave. But before he could close the door, the woman spoke. "It's okay," she said quietly. Her voice was weak but gentle. "People come to the wrong rooms all the time." He hesitated. Something in her tone made him pause. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he said again. "You didn't," she replied with a faint smile. "It's been very quiet here." There was a short silence between them. He didn't know why, but he didn't move. He felt like leaving would be rude, but staying also felt strange. Finally, he said, "I hope you get better soon." Her smile didn't fade, but her eyes looked different now. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you think." He nodded and slowly stepped back into the corridor. As the door closed, he felt something unusual in his chest. It wasn't sadness or fear. It was something softer, something he couldn't explain. He walked away, trying to focus on his own problems again, but he couldn't forget her eyes. A few minutes later, he found the correct room and met the doctor. The doctor explained the test results. Thankfully, his child's condition was not serious, but treatment was still needed. He felt relief, but the tiredness didn't leave his body. After everything was done, he sat on a bench in the waiting area. Parents, nurses, and patients moved around him, but he felt disconnected from the world. His thoughts kept returning to that quiet hospital room. He wondered why the woman looked so alone. No flowers on the table, no visitors, no laughter, just machines and silence. He told himself it was none of his business. Yet, something inside him refused to let go. The next day, he came back to the hospital for another appointment for his child. This time, he wasn't as rushed. He walked slowly through the corridor, holding his child's hand. When they passed the same hallway, he stopped without realizing it. His child looked up at him. "Why did you stop?" "Nothing," he said with a small smile. "Just checking something." He looked at the door again. The number was clear this time. It was definitely not related to his child's treatment. He stood there for a moment, feeling silly. Then he knocked lightly. There was no answer at first. He knocked again, a little louder. "Come in," a weak voice said. He opened the door slowly. The room looked the same as before. Quiet, dim, still. The woman turned her head and looked surprised. "It's you," she said. He felt awkward again. "I hope you don't mind. I just wanted to say hello." She looked at him for a few seconds, as if trying to understand why he was there. Then she smiled. "I don't mind," she said. "It's nice to see a familiar face." He stepped inside carefully, closing the door behind him. His child peeked from behind his leg. Curious. The woman looked at the child with interest. "Is that your little one?" "Yes," he replied. "My whole world." The child waved shyly. She waved back, her hand moving slowly. For a moment, the room felt warmer. He didn't know what to say next, so he said the first thing that came to his mind. "How are you feeling today?" She took a breath before answering. "Some days are better. Some days are not." He nodded, understanding more than he wanted to. There was another silence, but this time it felt less uncomfortable. Finally, she asked, "Did you find the right room yesterday?" He smiled slightly. "Yes, but I guess I found something else too." She looked at him, confused. "Nothing," he added quickly. I just wanted to check if you were okay." Her eyes softened. "I'm okay," she said. "As okay as I can be." He stood there for a while longer, talking about small things. The weather, the hospital food, the noisy machines. He didn't ask about her illness. He didn't ask personal questions. He just listened when she spoke. Before leaving, he said, "I'll be around the hospital for some time. If you ever feel bored, I can stop by again." She looked surprised again, but this time her smile was brighter. "I'd like that," she said. As he walked out of the room, he felt lighter than he had felt in a long time. He didn't know it yet, but that wrong door he had opened the night before was not a mistake. It was the beginning of something that would change his life forever. The next few days passed quietly, but something inside him had changed. Before, the hospital had always felt like a place of fear and pressure. Now it felt different. Every time he walked the corridors, his eyes searched for a familiar door. Even when he told himself not to, he tried to focus only on his child. He helped with homework, cooked meals, washed clothes, and tried to live the same routine life he had built over the years. But in the back of his mind, there was always a soft thought about the woman in the quiet hospital room. On the fourth day, he found himself standing in front of her door again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He knocked lightly. "Come in," she said. When he entered, she was sitting upright, looking out the window. Sunlight touched her face, making her look less pale than before. She turned and smiled when she saw him. "You came back," she said. He nodded. "I hope I'm not bothering you." "You're not," she replied gently. "Most people don't come back." He didn't ask what she meant by that. Instead, he pulled a chair closer to her bed and sat down. For a while, they talked about simple things. He told her about his child's school, about how difficult mornings were, and how quiet nights felt in his small home. She listened carefully, as if every word mattered. Then she spoke about herself. She said she had once lived a very busy life. She worked hard, traveled often, and dreamed of doing many things. But illness had slowly taken everything away from her. "At first, I thought it was just tiredness," she said. "I kept ignoring it. I thought I was strong enough to handle everything." He looked at her hands. They were thin, but steady. "When the doctors finally told me the truth," she continued, "I felt like my world stopped. Everyone else was moving forward, but I was stuck in one place." He didn't know what to say, so he just listened. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She spoke calmly, like someone who had already accepted something very painful. "Do you get many visitors?" he asked carefully. She shook her head slowly. "Not really," she said. "People have their own lives." "I understand that." He felt a strange heaviness in his chest. After a moment, his child came closer to the bed, holding a small drawing. "I made this," the child said shyly, showing paper. It was a simple drawing of a house, a tree, and 3 stick figures. The woman looked at it with surprise and warmth. "It's beautiful," she said. The child smiled proudly. "Can I give it to you?" the child asked. Her eyes widened slightly. "For me?" she asked softly. The child nodded. She took the drawing carefully, as if it were something very precious. "Thank you," she said. For the first time, her voice trembled. After that day, their visits became more frequent. Sometimes he came alone. Sometimes he came with his child. Sometimes he stayed only a few minutes. Sometimes he stayed longer. They never talked about big promises or deep plans. They talked about memories, dreams, and small moments of life. He learned that she loved quiet mornings, old songs, and stories about ordinary people. She learned that he was afraid of failing his child, that he felt lonely at night, and that he often pretended to be strong even when he wasn't. One evening, he found her looking tired. "You look exhausted," he said. She smiled faintly. "I didn't sleep well." "Why?" She looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Sometimes the nights feel very long," she said. "When everything is quiet, thoughts become louder." He understood that feeling. He had felt the same many times in his own home. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "If you ever feel like talking, even late at night, I'm usually around. My child sleeps early, and I don't sleep much anyway." She looked at him with surprise. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he replied. "I just wanted you to know you're not alone." Her eyes became moist, but she quickly looked away. Days passed, and something inside the hospital room began to change. The nurses noticed that she smiled more often. The machines still beeped, the medicines were still given, but the room no longer felt empty. One afternoon, while he was sitting beside her bed, she suddenly asked him a question. "Why do you come here?" she asked. He was silent for a moment. "I'm not sure," he said honestly. "At first, it was just an accident. Then, I guess I felt like I should." She looked at him closely. "You have a child," she said. "You have responsibilities. You don't have to spend your time with someone like me." He frowned slightly. "Someone like you?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Someone who may not be here for long." Her words hung in the air. He felt uncomfortable, but he didn't look away. "I don't come here because I have to," he said. "I come because I want to." She stared at him, as if trying to understand something deeper. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the window, the sky slowly turned orange as the sun began to set. That evening, when he stood up to leave, she stopped him. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For coming back," she replied. "Most people leave after the first visit." He nodded slowly. As he walked out of the room, he realized that he was no longer just a visitor. He was becoming part of her life. And without realizing it, she was becoming part of his. He didn't know where this path would lead. He didn't know how much pain or happiness it might bring. But for the first time in many years, he felt something he had almost forgotten. He felt connected. And somewhere deep inside, he felt afraid of losing that connection. Yet, he kept coming back, because some moments in life feel too real to ignore, and some people feel too important to walk away from. Days turned into a week, and their bond grew quietly but strongly. The single father found himself looking forward to the hospital visits, not just for the sake of checking on his child, but for her presence as well. Each time he walked down the corridor, his steps felt lighter, as if the world outside, with all its problems, was momentarily less heavy. The woman had grown a little stronger, though her condition remained fragile. Her weak smile had begun to carry warmth, and she greeted him with something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of relief that someone cared. He would pull up a chair beside her bed, and for hours they would talk about anything and everything. He learned small, intimate details of her life. How she loved morning walks in the park, the smell of fresh rain, and how she used to keep a tiny garden of flowers in her apartment. He listened quietly, not interrupting, letting her words paint pictures in the otherwise sterile hospital room. She, in turn, asked him about his life. He told her stories about his child, their small adventures, and the little joys he found in ordinary days. He spoke honestly about the challenges of being a single parent, about the loneliness that crept in when the house was silent at night, and the fear of failing the only person who depended entirely on him. One day, the child had made a small cardboard boat, decorated with stickers and colors. "I made this for you," the child said shyly, holding it out to the woman. She took it carefully and examined it, her thin fingers tracing the edges. "It's perfect," she whispered. She smiled in a way that seemed to light up the entire room, and for a moment, the machines, the alarms, and the sterile walls disappeared. That day, he stayed longer than usual. They spoke quietly about hopes dreams, and little regrets. He noticed the way she looked out the window whenever he laughed at one of the child's stories, as if she were savoring moments she had once taken for granted. But reality always lingered in the corners. Despite the small joys, her health remained fragile. Nurses occasionally warned him to be careful, to not get too close, but he could not stop himself. Something in her vulnerability did not feel sad to him. It felt human, real, and worth cherishing. One evening, he came to the hospital later than usual. The room was quiet, except for the faint beeping of the monitors. She was awake, sitting with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You're late," she said softly, a playful tone in her weak voice. "I had a long day," he replied, sitting beside her, "but I had to come." "You always say that," she said, smiling faintly. "I mean it," he said. "Even if you didn't want me here, I'd come." Her smile lingered, and for a moment silence filled the room. It was not awkward. It was full, like a shared understanding that words could not reach. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke about fear. "I am not afraid of dying," she said. "I am afraid of dying alone, of never knowing what it is to be cared for, to be loved fully." He felt a lump in his throat. He had expected her to talk about pain or illness, but not this. Her words struck something deep inside him, something he had kept buried for years. He reached out and gently held her hand. "You are not alone," he whispered. "I am here." She looked at him, eyes glistening with a mixture of surprise and relief. "Thank you," she said quietly. From that day onward, their bond became more profound. The room that once felt empty and cold began to hold warmth, laughter, and human connection. Nurses noticed that she smiled more often and seemed calmer. The presence of father and child created a small world within the hospital, a world where illness was not the only thing that existed. Sometimes he would read stories to her, narrating adventures of ordinary life that felt extraordinary in that quiet space. Sometimes she would share memories of the past, stories of joy and loss, and little regrets she carried. They spoke without judgment, simply letting words flow between them like a soft current of understanding. One evening, he brought his child again. The little one climbed onto the bed beside her, holding a small stuffed toy. "This is for you," the child said shyly. She took the toy and hugged it, then looked at the father. "You have a wonderful child," she said, full of life, laughter, and hope. He smiled, a little embarrassed. "Thank you. I try my best." Her eyes softened. "I can see it. You are a good parent." That simple acknowledgement, spoken with sincerity, moved him more than he expected. It was rare to feel seen in the midst of all responsibilities. And in that quiet hospital room, he felt a connection that neither time nor illness could break. Days turned into weeks, and their visits became a part of their daily routine. Sometimes he worried about the future, about how fragile life could be, but he didn't let that fear show. Being with her, seeing her smile, hearing her laugh, even in whispers, gave him hope that happiness could exist even in small moments. She also began to look forward to his visits. The days when income felt emptier, colder. He noticed her expressions change subtly when he arrived, the way her eyes would light up with recognition and something unspoken. One rainy afternoon, he arrived and found her looking particularly weak. Machines beeped steadily, and her breathing was shallow. He sat beside her, holding her hand carefully. "You look tired," he said softly. She shook her head weakly. "I didn't sleep well," she said. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked. She nodded slightly. "Please." They sat together in silence for a long time, listening to the rain patter against the window. Words were unnecessary. Just being present, sharing the quiet, made the room feel less lonely. At that moment, he realized something profound. It wasn't the grand gestures or the promises of tomorrow that mattered. It was this presence, care, and shared humanity. When it was time to leave, he felt a tug in his chest. He didn't want to leave her alone, not for a minute. Yet he knew he had to, for his child and for the responsibilities waiting outside the hospital walls. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said firmly, squeezing her hand. She smiled faintly, a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability in her eyes. "I'll be here," she replied. As he walked out of the room, He felt the weight of life pressing down again, but now it was lighter, shared between them. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if she would recover or how much time they had. But he knew one thing. He would not turn away from this connection, no matter how brief or fragile it might be. And slowly, he began to understand that some bonds are formed not by convenience or chance, but by the courage to be present when someone needs you the most. From that moment on, every visit carried significance. Every smile, every word, every small laugh became a thread, weaving their lives together. They weren't just a single father, a child, and a patient anymore. They were companions in a world that often seemed too heavy, finding warmth and meaning in the smallest acts of care. He couldn't imagine a day without seeing her now. And though the future was uncertain, he realized that the time they shared was already precious beyond measure. He left the hospital that evening, rain soaking his coat, but a quiet hope warming his heart. He knew that no matter what happened next, life had just shifted, quietly but irreversibly, in a way he would never forget. And inside that hospital room, she looked at the window, holding the small toy from his child, feeling for the first time in a long time that she was not alone. That night, the hospital felt heavier than usual. The corridors were quiet, the fluorescent lights humming softly, and the occasional distant beeping of machines filled the empty spaces. He arrived later than usual, worried about the delay, but also knowing that something inside told him he needed to be there. When he opened the door to her room, he froze for a moment. She looked weaker than ever. The tubes around her seemed more numerous. The monitors beeped faster, and the nurse who was checking her chart looked tense. She noticed him and tried to smile, but it was faint, barely reaching her eyes. "You're late?" she whispered, her voice fragile. "I'm here now," he said softly, moving closer. "How are you feeling?" Her eyes shifted to the ceiling, avoiding his gaze. "Not well," she admitted. "The doctors say it might get harder from here." He swallowed hard. He had expected challenges, but hearing the truth always hit differently when it was spoken aloud. He sat down beside her bed and took her hand in his, careful not to hurt her, but firm enough to let her feel he was there. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, though his own heart was racing. "I'm here with you." She looked at him, and for a moment her eyes searched his face, as if trying to read something she didn't dare hope for. Then she nodded slightly. Hours passed as they talked quietly, mostly about simple things. He didn't force conversations about the future, and she didn't dwell on fears. They shared small stories, laughs, and memories. But underneath the words, a quiet tension lingered, the unspoken awareness of limited time. When the nurse stepped in briefly to check her vitals, she glanced at him and whispered, "Thank you for staying." "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "I want to be here." Later, as the room grew darker, the evening light fading behind the window, she spoke in a softer voice. "I have something to ask you," she said. He leaned in closer, sensing the weight of her words. "Anything," he said. She hesitated, struggling for the right words. "I don't have much time," she admitted. "And I want to feel loved. Not just cared for, not just someone visiting me because it's kind. I want to know what it's like to be truly important to someone." His heart clenched. He had known from the start that her situation was serious, but now hearing her admit it so openly made everything feel real, immediate, and urgent. He had thought about his feelings before, but now the reality pressed upon him in a way he couldn't ignore. I care about you," he said, carefully choosing his words. "More than I can explain. And I don't want to let you feel alone, not now, not ever." Tears formed in her eyes. She tried to look away, embarrassed, but he gently turned her face toward him. "It's okay," he whispered. "You don't have to hide anything from me." The room was quiet except for the machines and their breathing. Outside, the night deepened and the hospital corridors remained empty, holding only the weight of their words and the electricity of something unspoken. She reached out and held his hand tighter. If I asked you something impossible," she began, "would you do it?" "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady despite the sudden fear rising in his chest. I want to be married," she said quietly. "Not later, maybe not even tomorrow. But I want someone to promise me that they'll be with me, fully, if even for a short time." He blinked, stunned. He had imagined many scenarios in his mind, But nothing prepared him for hearing her ask this. His mind raced. She was fragile, her health declining, and yet here she was, asking for something so human, so profound. I want that too, he said after a long pause. If you mean it, I want that too. Her eyes widened slightly, a mixture of relief and disbelief. You mean it? She whispered. Yes, he said firmly. I mean it. The decision was simple in his heart, though complicated in reality. They had to act quickly. He called a nurse, explaining quietly but urgently that they wanted to have a small ceremony. The nurse, surprised but touched, agreed to help. The hospital administration was informed, and a small arrangement was made. By the next afternoon, a quiet room was transformed into a place of ceremony. It was simple, with just a few staff members as witnesses. There were no decorations, no music, only a small bouquet of flowers and the quiet hum of hospital life continuing outside. He stood beside her bed, holding her hand. She looked up at him with fragile hope, and he saw something in her eyes that made him forget the machines, the illness, and the fear. It was trust, acceptance, and the courage to live fully, even in the shadow of death. The nurse guided them through the vows, and though their voices were soft, each word carried immense weight. They promised to be together, to care for each other, to share what time remained, and to make the moments count. When it was done, he kissed her hand gently. She smiled, tears running down her cheeks, her face radiant despite the weakness in her body. For a brief moment, the hospital room felt like the most sacred place in the world. Afterward, he stayed by her side, holding her hand through the evening. They didn't need to speak much. The air was full of understanding, of gratitude, and of quiet love. Every small gesture, a shared glance, a gentle squeeze of the hand, a whispered word, carried more meaning than words could contain. Later that night, when the lights dimmed and the staff moved quietly around the ward, he helped her adjust in bed. Rest now, he whispered. I'm right here. She nodded, closing her eyes, but not before giving him a faint smile that held everything. Hope, gratitude, and love. In those hours, he realized the depth of human courage. Even when the body is weak and time is short, the heart can choose to embrace life fully, to connect, to love. He stayed awake most of the night, watching her sleep, feeling the steady rise and fall of her chest. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, how a wrong door, a simple accident, had led him to someone who changed everything. The next days were filled with quiet care, gentle conversations, and small acts of love. Nurses brought medicine, but he brought laughter and warmth. The child visited often, filling the room with innocence and light. She loved listening to the little stories and watching the small joys she had almost forgotten. Even though every day reminded him of her fragility, he refused to dwell only on fear. He cherished each moment, knowing that love is not measured by time, but by the depth of connection, by presence, by the courage to care even when everything is uncertain. In the quiet hours, when the world outside moved on, the hospital room became a small sanctuary. They shared stories, memories, and dreams, creating a space where illness and fear were not the only realities. Through it all, he realized something powerful. Life is unpredictable, fragile, and fleeting. But love, real human love, can exist even in the smallest, briefest moments. And sometimes it arrives in the most unexpected ways, through wrong doors, chance encounters, and moments of courage. That night, he promised himself silently that he would hold her hand through whatever came next. He didn't know how many days remained, but he knew that every heartbeat mattered, every shared smile was precious, and every quiet moment together was a gift beyond measure. As the night deepened and the hospital became still, he sat beside her, holding her hand, and understood fully that life is not about avoiding pain or fearing the future. It is about choosing to be present, to love, and to make each moment count, no matter how brief. And in that quiet room, two hearts, once strangers, beat together with courage, hope, and a love that refused to be measured by time. The days after their small wedding in the hospital felt different. Even though the machine still beeped, the air smelled of medicine, and the world outside continued on its usual pace, something inside the room had changed completely. There was warmth now. There was connection. There was love. He stayed with her as much as he could, taking shifts with the nurses when his child was at school. His life had always been about responsibility, feeding, cleaning, working, parenting. But now, it was also about presence, just being there, holding her hand, talking about nothing and everything, watching her rest. Sometimes, he would read stories to her from the small stack of books he had brought. Other times, he would sit quietly, letting her look out the window at the sky. The little things mattered more than ever. A laugh at a story from his child, a gentle smile at a shared memory, a soft touch when the pain became too much. These moments were treasures. One afternoon, the child was sitting on the edge of her bed, showing her a tiny drawing of a house with 3 stick figures inside. "Look, this is us," the child said. "You, me, and Dad." She looked at the drawing, then at him, and her eyes glistened with tears. "I've never seen anything so beautiful," she whispered. "It's perfect." He felt his own chest tighten. Life had been hard, filled with challenges, and yet somehow in this tiny hospital room they had found something extraordinary. Love, human connection, and a sense of family that wasn't defined by perfect circumstances, but by care, presence, and shared moments. As the days passed, her health became more fragile. The doctor said it was expected, and the nurses advised him to prepare for the worst. But he refused to let fear rule the space they shared. Instead, he focused on living fully in each moment, cherishing every glance, every laugh, every quiet exchange. One evening, he sat beside her bed, holding her hand. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of the monitors and the distant hum of hospital life. She looked at him, her eyes weak but bright with something deeper. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. "Not of dying, but of leaving everything behind. Leaving you, leaving my life unfinished." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know," he said, "but you've done more than you realize. You've touched my life, my child's life, in ways I can't even explain. You've made everything better." She smiled faintly, a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "You've changed my life, too," she said. "I don't know if I ever thought I'd feel this happiness again." "You deserve it," he replied. "Even now, even like this, you deserve to feel loved and to be remembered." Tears ran down her cheeks, but she did not cry fully. Instead, she held his hand tightly, and he held hers, letting the silence speak everything that words could not. The following days became a delicate routine. He brought small gifts, flowers, fruits, little things that made her smile. His child visited often, bringing laughter and life into the sterile hospital room. Nurses began to notice the transformation in her demeanor. Though her body was fragile, her spirit seemed lighter because of the love surrounding her. And yet, he knew the end was approaching. There were nights when her breathing became shallow, and the monitors beeped in ways that made his stomach churn. He stayed by her side through those nights, refusing to leave, holding her hand, whispering words of comfort. One night, as the clock ticked past midnight, she turned to him and spoke with surprising strength. "Promise me," she said, her voice faint but clear, "that you'll keep living, that you'll keep loving, and that you'll remember me not as someone who left, but as someone who was loved." He choked back tears. "I promise," he whispered. "I promise I will." She gave him a small smile, closed her eyes, and rested her head against the pillow. In that moment, he felt the depth of what human connection truly meant. Not just being together in easy times, but holding on through fear, pain, and uncertainty. The following week, she grew weaker. The doctors confirmed what he already knew in his heart. Her time was near. He prepared himself, but no preparation could lessen the ache in his chest. Every breath she took felt precious, every smile a treasure. The child, sensing the seriousness of the situation, stayed close. Together, they laughed, told stories, and shared memories. They painted the room with joy, however fragile and fleeting it might be. One morning, as the sun rose softly over the hospital, she took his hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for being here, for caring, for loving me when life felt too short." He kissed her hand gently. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me in, for trusting me, for showing me what life can be, even in the hardest moments." Hours later, she passed away peacefully, holding his hand. The monitors beeped steadily, then went silent. He stayed there, refusing to move, feeling the emptiness that came with loss, but also the warmth of having loved fully, having been present, having made a difference in someone's final days. The days after her passing were quiet. The hospital room felt empty, but he kept returning to it, sitting quietly, remembering her words, her laughter, the strength in her fragile body, and the way she had touched both his life and his child's. He told the child about her in simple, tender words, not as a story of sadness, but as a story of love, courage, and human connection. She was part of our lives, he said, and she always will be. Time passed, but the memory of her remained vivid. He carried her lessons with him, about presence, about love, about cherishing moments regardless of how brief they might be. He realized that life is fragile, but it is the connections we make that give it meaning. He continued raising his child with the lessons she had taught them both. They laughed more, loved more openly, and appreciated the small joys of life. In quiet moments, he would look at the sky or hold his child's hand and remember her smile, her gentle words, her courage, and her love. Though she was gone, her presence lived on in the love they shared, in the courage he had gained, and in the way he embraced life differently because of her. Years later, when his child asked about her, he told the story not with tears, but with pride and gratitude. She came into our lives at a time when we needed love the most, he said. Even though it was brief, it was real, and it changed us forever. And in that, he found peace. Because love, once given, never truly leaves. It lingers, it teaches, and it shapes the hearts it touches. Even though the hospital corridors remained the same and life continued with its challenges, he walked through the world differently now, aware of the fragility of time, the importance of presence, and the power of human connection. And in his heart, she lived on, not as a memory of sorrow, but as a reminder of what it means to love fully, to be brave, and to hold on to moments that truly matter. He had entered the wrong room once, by accident, but that mistake had brought him something far greater than he could have imagined. A love that transcended fear, a bond that changed his life, and a story of humanity that he and his child would carry forever. In the quiet, still moments of life, he could feel her there, smiling, reminding him that love does not measure itself by time, but by depth, presence, and the courage to embrace life fully, even when the end is near. And in that love, he found strength. In that love, he found hope. In that love, he found the courage to continue living, loving, and sharing life with the person who mattered most, his child, and to honor her memory in every choice, every action, and every heartbeat that followed. Because some people arrive in our lives unexpectedly, and some moments, however brief, last forever, and he would never forget her.